The bell at Northwood High signaled the end of another soul-numbing day for 17-year-old Elijah Carter. The halls erupted into a chaotic river of backpacks and shouting. But Elijah moved against the current, his tall, lanky frame cutting a path toward the one place that felt like a sanctuary. The school's aging, underfunded planetarium, now mostly used as a storage closet. For Elijah, numbers weren't just problems on a page. They were a language, a symphony of logic and beauty that made sense in a world that often didn't. In his worn backpack, nestled between textbooks, was a leather-bound journal filled with his own elegant proofs and complex equations, a secret world where he calculated the orbital decay of satellites for fun. He slipped inside the dim planetarium, the air smelling of dust and old dreams. He pulled out his journal, the faint glow of a decommissioned star projector casting long shadows. He was working on a complex algorithm to optimize the trajectory for a Mars sample return mission, a puzzle NASA had open-sourced to public. To Elijah, it was just another beautiful problem. The door creaked open, and Mr. Albright, his advanced calculus teacher, stood silhouetted in the light. At 52, Albright had a perpetually weary expression, his tweed jacket smelling of chalk dust and cynicism. "Carter, hiding again, I see," Albright said, his voice a dry rasp. "I was hoping to find you. I'm returning to midterms." He held out a test paper. A bright red 68% was circled at the top. Elijah's heart sank. He'd known one of the proofs was shaky, rushed because he'd been up late working on a NASA problem. "Sir, I know I messed up the Leibniz notation on question 4, but the underlying logic is irrelevant if you can't follow the basic rules, Carter," Albright interrupted, tapping the paper with a bony finger. "This is precisely what I'm talking about. You daydream. You scribble in that notebook. You have these fanciful ideas, but you lack the foundational discipline. People like you need to master the basics before you try to run." The coded language hung in the air. People like you. It was the same refrain he'd heard since middle school, a subtle, persistent dismissal of his intellect, a presumption that a black kid from the East Side was inherently less capable. "It's not fanciful, sir. It's applied mathematics," Elijah said, his voice low but firm. Albright's eyes fell on the open journal, where complex differential equations for orbital mechanics were neatly sketched. He let out a short, derisive laugh. "Orbital mechanics? Carter, let's be realistic. You struggle with related rates. Focus on passing this class. A community college remedial course won't care about your doodles." He plucked the journal from the desk, flipping through it with a condescending smirk. "This is nonsense. A waste of your time and mine. You need to learn your place." The words were a physical blow. Learn your place. They echoed in the silent room, stripping away the one thing Elijah had, his intellectual confidence. Just then, the school's new physics teacher, Ms. Anya Sharma, 28 and fresh out of graduate program at MIT, walked in looking for a spare projector. She overheard Albright's last remark and paused, her brow furrowed. "Everything all right in here?" she asked, her gaze shifting from Albright's scornful face to Elijah's humiliated one. "Just giving Mr. Carter some necessary academic guidance," Albright said, dropping the journal back onto the desk with a dismissive thud. "He's confused rigorous mathematics with science fiction." He left, the door swinging shut behind him. The silence he left behind was heavier than before. Ms. Sharma approached Elijah. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the journal. Elijah, his cheeks burning with shame, nodded mutely. She picked it up, her eyes scanning the pages. Her expression shifted from casual curiosity to intense focus. She traced a line of his calculations with her finger, her lips moving silently. She flipped a page, then another. "Elijah," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "where did you get this?" It's just something I've been working on," he mumbled. "This isn't just something," she said, looking at him, her eyes wide with astonishment. "This is a partial solution to the Mars Ascent Vehicle trajectory optimization. The NASA challenge. Do you understand what you've done here?" Elijah shrugged. I was just trying to find a more efficient path." Ms. Sharma stared at him, then at the journal, then back at him. The dismissive words of Mr. Albright still hung in the air, but now they were challenged by the evidence in her hands. "Elijah," This is extraordinary, she said. But why didn't you show this to anyone? Before he could answer, the planetarium door burst open again. It was the school principal, Mr. Davies, looking flustered. Anya, there you are. The superintendent is here for the budget meeting, and he noticed Elijah. Carter, shouldn't you be on your way home? Ms. Sharma quickly closed the journal, a determined look on her face. Actually, Mr. Davies, I was just discussing Elijah's independent study project. It's quite remarkable. Mr. Davies gave a dismissive wave. That's fine, Anya, but we have real issues to discuss. The state test scores are in, and our math averages have dropped again. Albright's department is under scrutiny. He glanced at Elijah. We need our students focused on core competencies, not side projects. As the principal hurried Miss Sharma out, she looked back at Elijah, her eyes promising. This isn't over. But Elijah was left alone once more, the red 68% glaring from his test. The words, "learn your place," echoing in his mind, and the first flicker of validation he'd ever felt already being extinguished by the machinery of a system that had already decided who he was. The fluorescent lights of the principal's office hummed like a swarm of angry insects. Anya Sharma sat across from a weary-looking Mr. Davies, Elijah's journal resting on the desk between them like a piece of contested evidence. Anya, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but you're new here, Mr. Davies said, massaging his temples. Elijah Carter is a C student in Albright's class. We have state standardized tests in 6 weeks, and our funding depends on those scores. We need to focus on getting students like him to a basic level of proficiency, not chasing interplanetary daydreams. This isn't a daydream, Robert, Anya insisted, her voice firm. She opened the journal to a specific page. This is a novel application of the calculus we're supposed to be teaching. He's using variational principles to solve a boundary value problem that has stumped NASA engineers for months. He's not failing to learn. The system is failing to teach him. The system, Mr. Davies countered, needs him to pass Albright's tests. Harold Albright has been here for 25 years. He's a pillar of this math department. You're asking me to undermine his authority based on some scribbles in a notebook. I'm asking you to look at the evidence, Anya said, her frustration mounting. This student is being systematically discouraged. Albright told him to learn his place. What place is that exactly? The conversation was going in circles. Anya left the office with a bitter taste in her mouth, but with a new, fierce resolve. If the system wouldn't help Elijah, she would go around it. She found him the next day, sitting alone at lunch, his head buried in a textbook. Elijah, she said, sitting down across from him, forget Mr. Albright. Forget the midterm. I'm creating an independent study. Advanced applied mathematics. You'll be the only student. We'll use your journal as the textbook. Elijah looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes, quickly guarded. Principal Davies would never approve it. He doesn't have to, Anya said with a sly smile. It's already in the system as a credit recovery course. We'll meet after school in the planetarium. And so, their secret academy of one began. For 2 hours every afternoon, the dusty planetarium transformed into a think tank. Anya didn't teach Elijah. She facilitated, guiding him to resources, challenging his assumptions, and providing the rigorous peer review his genius had been craving. He refined his Mars trajectory solution, his work growing more elegant and sophisticated. Meanwhile, the tension in the math department grew palpable. Mr. Albright noticed Elijah's renewed confidence and the time he was spending with a new physics teacher. He saw it as an act of subversion. A week into their sessions, Anya had an idea. This solution is too good to stay in a notebook. Elijah, you should submit it to the NASA Challenge portal. Elijah hesitated. What's the point? It's probably wrong. That's not your voice, Anya said gently. That's Albright's. Submit it. With Anya's encouragement, he uploaded his work, attaching a note that it was a submission from a high school student. They didn't expect a reply. It was just an exercise in courage. The following Monday, the storm broke. Mr. Albright, having grown suspicious, happened to be in the main office when a call came through from Ms. Sharma, the secretary Flustered, mentioned the caller was from the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Albright's face turned to stone. He marched directly to Mr. Davies' office. By the time Anya was summoned, the journal was once again on the principal's desk. But this time, Mr. Davies looked furious. "Ms. Sharma, did you encourage a student to misrepresent our school by submitting work to a federal agency under false pretenses?" Albright accused before she could even sit down. It wasn't false. It was his work. Anya shot back. "Harold intercepted the call," Mr. Davies said, his voice cold. "NASA is sending someone. They think it's a prank, that the work was plagiarized. They want to investigate. Do you understand the embarrassment this brings to Northwood High?" "Embarrassment? They're coming because his work is groundbreaking." Anya argued. "They're coming because they think we're trying to cheat a public competition." Davies slammed his hand on the desk. "This independent study is terminated, effective immediately. Ms. Sharma, you are to have no further unsupervised contact with Elijah Carter. We will handle the NASA visit as a disciplinary matter." Anya was silenced. The system had closed ranks. That afternoon, a dejected Elijah waited in the empty planetarium. When Anya arrived, her face told him everything. "I'm so sorry, Elijah," she whispered. "It's over. They've forbidden it." Elijah's shoulders slumped. The spark that had been lit was being smothered. As he packed his bag, his phone buzzed. It was an email notification. The subject line read, "NASA Open Innovation Initiative. Regarding your submission." With trembling hands, he opened it. It wasn't an accusation of plagiarism. It was a request. The email was from a Dr. Evelyn Reed, a lead propulsion engineer at JPL. It read, "Asterisk, Mr. Carter, your approach to the mass ratio optimization in the MAV trajectory is unlike anything we've seen. The elegance of your calculus is staggering. We have questions. We would like to schedule a video conference with you and your faculty advisor to discuss your methodology this Friday." Asterisk, he showed the phone to Anya. Her eyes widened, a mix of triumph and terror. NASA believed him. They were impressed. But the school had already declared the work a fraud and forbidden their contact. The NASA video call was in 72 hours. The world is ready to see his genius. But the school has forbidden him from speaking. A NASA engineer is waiting, but his teacher has been silenced. How can they seize this moment without losing everything? The high-stakes Part 3 is next, asterisk, asterisk. The NASA email was a key, but the school had bolted every door. Elijah and Ms. Sharma stood in the silent planetarium, the glowing screen of his phone feeling both like a lifeline and a warrant for their academic arrest. "They'll never let this happen," Elijah said, the hope in his voice already fading, replaced by the familiar weight of expectation. "Dr. Albright will tell them I cheated. Not if we control the narrative," Anya replied, her mind racing. Her career was on the line, but the fire in Elijah's eyes when he'd read that email was worth the risk. "We have 72 hours. We need to prepare you to defend your work like the scientist you are, but we have to be invisible." They became ghosts in the machine of Northwood High. Their meetings moved from the planetarium to the public library, a neutral territory smelling of old paper and quiet ambition. Anya drilled Elijah not on the math. He owned that completely, but on the presentation. She taught him how to articulate his thought process, anticipate questions, and defend his logical leaps with the calm authority of a seasoned researcher. Elijah, freed from Albright's disparaging gaze, blossomed. He created slides, refined his explanations, and prepared to stand before the highest scientific authority in the land. Back at school, the administration's lockdown was in full effect. Mr. Davies sent a school-wide email reminding students and faculty about the academic integrity policy. Mr. Albright, in a fit of preemptive damage control, announced a mandatory extra credit test prep session for his calculus students, scheduled for the exact time of the NASA call on Friday. A transparent attempt to keep you under his thumb. Anya fumed when Elijah showed her the announcement. "What do we do?" Elijah asked, the old anxiety creeping back in. "We do what geniuses do," Anya said, a determined glint in her eye. "We innovate." The plan was audacious. They would use the school's own technology against it. The library had a private study room with a high-speed internet connection. They would commandeer it for the call, but they needed a cover. The ally they didn't know they had revealed herself. It was Chloe, the student council president and a budding journalist for the school paper. She'd heard the rumors about the NASA plagiarism scandal and saw right through the administration spin. She approached Anya after school. "I know what's really going on, Miss Sharma," Chloe said, her voice low. "Albright's been crushing smart kids for years. Let me help. I can get you the library room booked under the student council's name. No one will question it." It was the break they needed. Friday arrived, a day crackling with unspoken tension. Elijah felt every tick of the clock like a drumbeat. In calculus, Mr. Albright handed out the extra credit test with a smug, final glance in Elijah's direction. The message was clear: know your place. When the bell rang for the session, Elijah stood up, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Mr. Carter," Albright's voice cut through the room. "The session is mandatory if you want any chance of passing this class." "I have a prior commitment, sir," Elijah said, his voice surprisingly steady. Albright's face tightened. "Sit down." Every student in the room was watching. This was the moment of public defiance. "I can't do that, sir," Elijah said, and he walked out of the classroom, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. He met Anya and Chloe in the library study room. They had 10 minutes. They set up a laptop, logged into the video conferencing link, and tested the audio. The screen showed a waiting room, the NASA logo prominent in the background. Then, the door to the study room opened. It wasn't Dr. Evelyn Reed from NASA. It was Mr. Davies and a livid Mr. Albright. "I knew it." Albright spat, his face purple with rage. "Skipping a mandatory session for this charade. The call is over, Carter. You're coming to the office. Ms. Sharma, your employment here is finished." Just as he spoke, a chime came from the laptop. The waiting room screen vanished, replaced by the face of a sharp-eyed black woman with silver streaks in her hair, wearing a lab coat over a NASA polo. "Hello? Is this Elijah Carter and faculty advisor Anya Sharma?" Dr. Evelyn Reed asked, her voice crisp and professional. Her eyes took in the scene on her screen. A terrified student, a defiant teacher, and two angry administrators looming over them. Mr. Davies froze, his professional instincts warring with his fury. Elijah took a deep breath, looked directly into the camera, and found his voice. "Yes, Dr. Reed. My name is Elijah Carter. Thank you for your time. But before we begin," he said, his gaze shifting to his principal, "there seems to be a disagreement about whether I'm qualified to be here." Dr. Reed's eyebrows rose slightly. "Is that so? And who are these gentlemen?" The library study room was frozen in a tableau of high-stakes tension. On the laptop screen, Dr. Evelyn Reed's expectant face was a window to a world of pure meritocracy. In the room, Mr. Davies and Mr. Albright represented the rigid, punishing system of Northwood High. Elijah's heart was a trip hammer, but his voice was steady. "Dr. Reed, these are my principal, Mr. Davies, and my calculus teacher, Mr. Albright. They were just expressing concerns about my participation in this call." Albright, recovering from his shock, stepped forward, his face a mask of forced professionalism. "Dr. Reed, my apologies for this interruption. There's been a misunderstanding. The student skipped a mandatory class and has a history of fanciful work. We're simply ensuring academic integrity." Dr. Reed's gaze was cool, analytical. She was a scientist assessing data. "Academic integrity is paramount at NASA as well, Mr. Albright. It's why I'm here." Elijah's submission was not fanciful. It was one of the most innovative approaches we've seen. His integrity is precisely what I'd like to verify by hearing directly from him. She turned her attention to Elijah. "The floor is yours, Mr. Carter." It was the moment of truth. Anya gave him a nearly imperceptible nod. Chloe, hiding just outside the door, gave a thumbs up, and Elijah began. He shared his screen, pulling up the slides he and Anya had prepared. He started not with the complex calculus, but with the core physical problem. The immense fuel cost of adjusting a Mars ascent vehicle's trajectory mid-flight. He explained it with a clarity that made the cosmic problem feel intimate. Then he dove into the math. He walked Dr. Reed through his journal, explaining how he had applied a modified calculus of variations to model the thrust as a continuous function rather than discrete burns. He described how this reduced the mass ratio, saving critical kilograms of fuel. He spoke for 10 uninterrupted minutes. The equations flowed from him not as memorized formulas, but as a native language. He was no longer a defensive student. He was a peer explaining a breakthrough to a colleague. Mr. Davies stood in stunned silence, watching a version of Elijah he had never seen, a confident, brilliant young scholar. Mr. Albright scowled deepened with every passing second. His narrative of the underperforming, daydreaming student crumbling live on camera. When Elijah finished, Dr. Reed was silent for a moment, a slow smile spreading across her face. Elijah, that was exceptional. Your grasp of variational principles is, frankly, postgraduate level. You've not only replicated established knowledge, you've built upon it. I have one final question. She leaned toward her camera. The constant you introduced on page 4 of your notes. Can you walk me through your derivation? It was the ultimate test. A question not from a textbook, but from the frontier of the problem itself. Elijah didn't hesitate. He picked up his stylus and began sketching on his tablet, his voice calm and assured. I treated the gravitational gradient not as a fixed variable, but as a dynamic field influenced by the vehicle's own mass loss. The constant emerges from reconciling that relationship with the Tsiolkovsky rocket equation. Dr. Reed nodded, her expression one of clear admiration. Brilliant, truly brilliant. She then turned her attention back to the administrators. Mr. Davies, Mr. Albright, thank you for your concern, but I can state unequivocally that the work is not only Elijah's own, it's groundbreaking. We'd like to formally incorporate his insights into our modeling. We'll be sending over documentation to that effect. The victory was absolute. The validation was coming from the highest possible authority. Mr. Davies, his face pale, managed a stiff nod. Of course. We support all our students' achievements. Albright said nothing. He simply turned and walked out of the room, his pride in tatters. As the call ended, a wave of relief and triumph washed over Elijah and Anya. They had done it. They had won. But the victory was short-lived. The next morning, a formal letter was placed in Anya Sharma's mailbox. It cited insubordination and violation of school protocol regarding unsupervised student contact. It was a notice of non-renewal of her contract. She was being fired. The system, humiliated, was striking back. They couldn't touch Elijah's triumph, so they were punishing the adult who had enabled it. When Elijah heard the news, his joy turned to ash. His success had cost his only ally her job. He had proven he belonged among the stars, but the gravity of prejudice had pulled his mentor down. He went to Mr. Davies' office, the NASA commendation email printed in his hand. You can't fire her for this, he said, his voice trembling with a new, raw anger. Mr. Carter, Davies replied, his tone weary but final. This is a personnel matter. Her actions, while perhaps well-intentioned, violated policy. The decision is made. As Elijah left the office, defeated and furious, his phone buzzed. It was a new email from Dr. Evelyn Reed. Asterisk, Elijah, it was a pleasure. Your mind is a national asset. I've taken the liberty of forwarding your work and our conversation to the Dean of the Engineering School at my alma mater, MIT. They've opened a fast-track application for you. There's just one condition from the admissions board. They require a formal letter of recommendation from your high school math department chair. Asterisk, the final, cruel twist. His ticket to MIT, to his future, depended on the signature of the man who had just tried to destroy his mentor and who had told him to learn his place, Mr. Harold Albright. The MIT acceptance letter was a phantom limb. Elijah could feel its presence, the weight of the opportunity, but he couldn't grasp it. The single, impossible condition, a recommendation from Mr. Albright, hung over him like a blade. It was a perfect, bureaucratic checkmate. Albright would never agree. To do so would be to admit he was wrong, to validate everything he had dismissed. Anya Sharma was packing her classroom into cardboard boxes, her movements slow and defeated. The spark that had once lit her eyes was gone, extinguished by the system's cold pragmatism. "Forget it, Elijah," she said, not looking at him as she wrapped a model of the solar system in bubble wrap. "It's over. You proved yourself to the world. That's what matters. Don't give him the power to hurt you again." But Elijah wasn't the same student who had hidden in the planetarium. He had stood toe-to-toe with a NASA engineer and won. He had learned that his mind was a territory no one could diminish unless he allowed it. "He doesn't get to end this," Elijah said, his voice low and resolute. "Not for you and not for me." He knew he couldn't appeal to Albright's non-existent better nature. He had to change the calculus of the situation. He had to make it more costly for Albright to refuse than to comply. He spent the night digging, not through math problems, but through school board records and public meeting minutes. He was looking for leverage, and he found it. The next day, he walked into Mr. Albright's classroom after the final bell. The teacher looked up from his grade book, his expression a familiar blend of annoyance and contempt. "Carter, I assume you're here to beg. Save your breath." "I'm here to negotiate," Elijah replied, placing a single sheet of paper on Albright's desk. It was a printout of a school board memo from 6 months prior. Albright's eyes scanned the page. It detailed a new district-wide equity and excellence initiative, championed by a newly elected school board member. Its cornerstone was identifying and nurturing underrepresented talent in STEM. A failure to support a verified, NASA-recognized genius like Elijah, particularly after a public vindication, would be a direct violation of this public mandate. "What is this?" Albright scoffed, though a flicker of unease crossed his face. "That's the school board strategic priority," Elijah said calmly. "Now, here's my offer. You write the letter of recommendation for MIT. You make it glow. You call me the most promising mathematical mind you've encountered in your career. In return, I won't take this." He tapped the memo, along with a detailed account of you telling me to learn my place and trying to block my NASA call, directly to the school board and the local news. "They'd love to know how you're implementing the Equity and Excellence Initiative." Albright's face drained of color. He was a man who had built his career on a facade of unassailable authority. A public scandal, especially one tied to racial bias, would not just embarrass him. It would end him. It would unravel the legacy he'd spent 25 years building. "You're blackmailing me," he whispered, his voice tight with fury. "I'm applying pressure," Elijah corrected. "Just like you taught us with related rates. You're looking at the consequences of your own actions. The question is, can you calculate the derivative? Can you see where this path leads you?" The room was silent. Albright looked from Elijah's unwavering gaze to the damning memo on his desk. He saw his future in that moment. A forced early retirement, his reputation in tatters, becoming a district-wide example of the old guard that had to be cleaned out. He was cornered. Slowly, stiffly, he turned to his computer. He opened a new document. His fingers hovered over the keys for a long moment before he began to type. The click-clack of the keyboard was the only sound in the room. He wrote for 5 minutes, then printed the letter. He signed it with a furious scrawl and shoved it across the desk. "Get out," he snarled. Elijah picked up the letter. It was perfect. It was everything MIT needed to hear. He had won. He found Anya in the parking lot, loading the last box into her car. He handed her the letter. Her eyes welled with tears as she read it. "How?" "I used the system against him," Elijah said, "just like you taught me to think around a problem." For the first time in weeks, a genuine smile broke through Anya's sadness. "You're going to MIT." But as they celebrated their hard-won victory, Elijah's phone buzzed. It was an email from the MIT admissions office. The subject line, "Urgent, regarding your application." His heart leapt into his throat. He opened it, expecting confirmation. Instead, the email was cold and formal. Asterisk, "Mr. Carter, we have received your letter of recommendation from Mr. Harold Albright. However, we have also received an anonymous communication, corroborated by your school administration, stating that you obtained this letter under duress through threats and coercion. Such behavior is antithetical to the character and integrity we expect in our student body. Your application is hereby suspended pending a full review. You will be contacted by our disciplinary committee. Asterisk. Albright. He had played his final, desperate card. He had fired a missile on his way out of the bunker, destroying the very bridge he'd been forced to build. Elijah stared at the screen, the triumphant letter of recommendation, now feeling like a worthless scrap of paper in his hand. He had outmaneuvered his teacher, but he hadn't accounted for the sheer, vindictive spite of a man with nothing left to lose. The email from MIT was a gut punch, but it ignited a cold, clear fury in Elijah. This was no longer about a recommendation, or even college. This was a war for his name, for the truth of his own mind. Albright had chosen to burn everything down rather than see him succeed. There would be no more negotiating. He showed the email to Anya. Her face, which had moments before been radiant with hope, hardened into an expression of pure resolve. He's just signed his own professional death warrant, she said, her voice quiet and dangerous. We're not asking anymore. We're exposing. They mobilized their allies. Chloe, the student journalist, had been quietly building a dossier. She had recorded Albright's public dismissal of Elijah in the planetarium. She had statements from other honor roll students, black, Latino, female, who described similar patterns of being systematically discouraged and belittled by the math chair, but they needed the final piece. The undeniable proof that Elijah's work was his own, and that Albright had knowingly lied to MIT. Elijah knew what he had to do. He emailed Dr. Evelyn Reed at NASA. He didn't beg or explain. He simply wrote, Asterisk, Dr. Reed, my integrity is being questioned in a way that threatens my future. The teacher who told me to learn my place is now telling MIT I coerce him. I need to prove, once and for all, that the mind behind the mathematics is mine. I am requesting a proctored live examination. Give me your hardest unsolved problem from the public challenge portal. I will solve it on camera with you watching. Let my work be the only character witness that matters. Asterisk. It was a Hail Mary of monumental proportions. Dr. Reed's response came in less than an hour. Asterisk. Elijah, I've been briefed on the situation. Your proposal is unprecedented, and I admire your courage. Be ready tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The problem will be the thermal oscillation mitigation for deep space habitats. It has a 0.3% public solve rate. The world will be watching. Asterisk. She had not only agreed, she had turned it into a public event. NASA's press team sent out a release, framing it as a celebration of young ingenuity. The story of the high school prodigy fighting to prove his genius against a biased system went viral. Hashtag Let Elijah Prove It trended nationally. The following day, the Northwood High Auditorium was packed. Students, teachers, and a scrum of national media filled the seats. A large screen was set up on stage, split between a live feed of Elijah at a desk and Dr. Reed in her NASA lab. In the front row, a stone-faced Mr. Albright was forced to sit by a livid Mr. Davies, who now realized the school was in the global spotlight for all the wrong reasons. Elijah walked onto the stage to a mix of applause and tense silence. He didn't look at Albright. He sat down, took a deep breath, and nodded to Dr. Reed. The clock starts now, Elijah, she said. You have 90 minutes. Show us what you can do. The problem appeared on a screen, and the large display. It was a beast, a multivariable optimization nightmare, involving heat transfer, structural integrity, and power consumption for a hypothetical Mars habitat. The entire auditorium watched, holding its breath, as Elijah began to work. He didn't hesitate. His stylus flew across his tablet, filling the digital canvas with a beautiful, intricate tapestry of equations. He spoke his reasoning aloud, his voice calm and focused, explaining each logical step as he deconstructed the seemingly impossible problem into manageable, solvable parts. It was a live masterclass in theoretical engineering. With 7 minutes left on the clock, Elijah set down his stylus. The solution converges here, he said, circling a final, elegant equation. The optimal configuration requires a phase composite material with a variable thermal conductivity gradient, managed by this control algorithm. On the screen, Dr. Reed was silent for a moment, her team of engineers visible behind her, staring at their own monitors. Then, she looked directly into the camera, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across her face. "Elijah," she said, her voice ringing with authority through the auditorium. "Not only is your solution correct, but your approach has just shaved 5% off our best internal model. You didn't just solve the problem. You improved upon NASA's own work. Live, on camera." The auditorium erupted. Students leaped to their feet, cheering. Camera flashes exploded. Mr. Davies put his head in his hands. Dr. Reed wasn't finished. Her gaze seemed to pierce through the screen and land directly on Harold Albright, and to the administrator at MIT who questioned this young man's character. She said, her voice dropping to a razor's edge. "I have one question. What exactly do you consider integrity? Because from where I sit, you just tried to extinguish one of the brightest lights in American science. My call to the MIT president is my next order of business." It was over. The public proof was absolute and devastating. The fallout was immediate. MIT reinstated Elijah's application with a public apology and a full scholarship. The school board launched an investigation into Northwood High's math department, placing Albright on immediate administrative leave. Anya Sharma was not only rehired but promoted to a new district-wide position as Director of Student Innovation. At a school assembly a week later, Elijah stood beside Anya, accepting a commendation. As the student body cheered, he looked out at the crowd, not with triumph, but with a quiet sense of peace. He had proven that no one gets to define your limits, but you. The final shot was of Elijah, back in the planetarium, not hiding, but teaching, leading a new after-school program for other students who had been told they didn't belong. He was no longer just a student who had solved a NASA problem. He was a teacher now, showing others how to reach for stars. Prejudice tried to fail him, but his mind was already light years ahead. A teacher saw a problem, but a genius saw a solution. The system tried to silence him, but the truth has a gravity all its own. The lesson is over, but the mission has just begun.